Hi guys, my name is Sharan and I'm one of the medical students from Lancaster University, and in this video we're going to go through ethical principles. Now these questions might crop up in your medical school interviews, so it's best to understand these principles so that you can apply them in your ethical dilemma questions. Often students jump straight into the answer and give their opinion or verdict with whatever's going on in the dilemma. It's best to stop, summarize what's happening and use these ethical principles to then come to a conclusion at the end. So I'm going to give you guys a case so that you can work through this case using each of the principles, how they apply to the case, and then coming up with your own opinion or conclusion at the end. So let's get started with the case. This is the case. A 50-year-old man is at a doctor's clinic and he has an abdominal aortic aneurysm, which is basically a really wide blood vessel in your abdomen, and it has a 10% chance of bursting each year, which would almost kill the patient. And he's been told that the surgeons can fix this aneurysm, but during the surgery there's a 5% chance that he may die. So the ethical dilemma is this: should you go ahead and offer this surgical corrective procedure or not? Pause this video and we'll jump straight into the answer. I want to quickly mention that there are guidelines that helps doctors do what needs to be done for the patients, but the guidelines are there just to guide the doctors to do what needs to be done for the general population rather than for each individual. So when ethical dilemmas are quite complex and it needs to be kind of discussed with other clinicians, doctors can use ethical principles to come to a fair and reasonable conclusion at the end. So in this scenario, we're going to talk through some of the ethical principles that we can use to come to a conclusion. So if we apply beneficence to the scenario, it would be better to go ahead with the intervention so that the patient has less chance of essentially dying from the abdominal aortic aneurysm from bursting because of the fact that we've given them some sort of surgical intervention. However, we have to weigh up another ethical principle, which is about doing no harm, and that's called non-maleficence. If we do go ahead with this corrective procedure, there is a 5% chance of this patient dying during the procedure. So we have to weigh up the non-maleficence factor as well as the beneficence factor. Sometimes you can use non-maleficence and say that rather than us causing direct harm to the patient, we can just let the patient do what they want and essentially respect whatever choice they make. So this goes on to the next ethical principle, and that is patient autonomy. Patient autonomy is all about ensuring that the patient has the right to choose what happens to them because they have complete right to their own body. If the patient goes ahead and says that I do not want this surgical procedure, I want to go about living my life being happy, the surgery is too much for me to deal with, you can by all means respect their choice and give them dignity in their choice by saying, okay, that's completely your choice, we respect that. So by upholding patient autonomy, we have to respect their decisions. Sometimes it can get a bit complicated if the patients don't have the ability to comprehend the scenario that's happening. So for example, children, they may not have the capacity to understand what exactly is happening. So the choice may often be done by the parents for the kids. But in this scenario, we're assuming that the patient has complete capacity to make a right decision that they think is best for them. So if we're upholding patient autonomy, we have to go with what the patient wants. But it's important as clinicians to give them the pros and cons of doing nothing or going ahead with the surgery. I believe that it's a complete responsibility of the doctor to at least give their opinion as to what's best for the patient, but it should never be coercion. It should never be forced upon the patient. I cannot go to this patient and say, you are going to have this surgery because I believe that it's the best for you rather than doing nothing about it. Then it would be very difficult and you're going against the patient's wishes if they don't want to go ahead with the surgery. So it's best to communicate with the patient, find out what they want, and then going ahead with what is best for them. So upholding patient autonomy. And then the final ethical pillar that we have to talk about is justice. And justice relates to fairness. Now there's three types of justice, or it comes under three categories. So rights-based justice, legal justice, and then distributive justice. So we'll go through each one. Legal justice is all about upholding the law. If there's a law specifically saying that we need to go ahead and treat all these patients with abdominal aortic aneurysms with the surgery, then doctors have to follow the law and go ahead with it. But there's no law that specifically says to ensure that everyone with the abdominal aortic aneurysm needs to have surgery. So we can put that aside. Rights-based justice. Now, rights-based justice is all about upholding human rights. So human rights is, there's a whole list of things that, you are entitled to as humans, the rights that you have. And it could be to do with, right to a private life, right to family, things to do with marriage, having children, etc., etc. So rights-based justice doesn't really apply to this scenario. So we're going to put that aside as well. However, distributive justice is what relates to this scenario. In the NHS, we have finite resources. Now, we have to be careful how we allocate resources to different sectors and sections and parts of the NHS. So when we're providing service, we need to keep in mind that, we have finite resources and we cannot keep using too much resources in one department because that would jeopardize another part of the NHS. So, for example, if this surgery for this patient costs £10,000, that £10,000 could be used to either aid or alleviate some health problem in another area. For example, this £10,000 can be used to perhaps help smokers quit smoking through a smoking cessation service. And one could argue that if that helps, for example, 100 smokers quit smoking, that would stop them to go on to have lung cancer in a couple of decades. So this use of the money could be better used elsewhere because you get more utility out of it. As an argument, we have to keep distributive justice in mind whenever we're treating patients, groups of people, or the population. So it's best to always refer to this so that the examiners know that you have a wider understanding about the fact that there's a finite nature of resources within the NHS. So once you have talked about each of the principles, beneficence to do good, non-maleficence to reduce or do no harm, patient autonomy, which is to do with upholding the patient's wishes and going for what they want, and finally justice, talking about the 3 different types, then you can formulate it all together and come with a conclusion at the end. So for example, I would say that putting this all in mind, I would then go ahead and do the surgery for this patient. Even though I understand they have a 5% chance of dying, I believe that it is in the best interest for the patient. Best interest is a key word. Essentially says that this is what I believe to be the best for this patient in this particular scenario. So it's best to always finish off with saying, so I would say that I would go ahead with doing this or this because I believe that it's in the best interest for the patient. There might not be a right answer, but if you can talk through each of the principles and come to a nice conclusion at the end, then by all means, your opinion is completely valid. Now remember, in your interviews, you need to structure your answers one by one. So if you have an ethical scenario, structure it by summarizing the case first. So you show the examiner that you understand the case, then go through the 4 principles, and finally finish off with your conclusion. It's a nice way to structure your answer and show to the examiner that you thought about these different principles and then you've come to a conclusion, then jump right into a conclusion at the end. I hope you found that useful and that you can use this structure to answer your ethical scenario questions. I've got more videos coming up, so if you want to stay tuned, give this video a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe as well. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.